All right, so this is Campaign Manager 2008. And I guess the most exciting thing about it is the basic conceit that it has, which is, historically, most modern elections have focused on a few states, the swing states. And this is the only game that I've seen that really captures that aspect properly. That certain candidates just aren't going to be able to win, a state that's strongly in the hands of one of the opposing party. And truth be told, the same's largely true in the primaries as well, which is that there are states you're just not going to be able to compete in, and the games that cover primaries generally don't represent that aspect properly. It's usually more of a matter of, the strategy that you use is what determines which states you're going to win, rather than, there's just candidates who aren't going to be able to fly in certain areas, and they know it from the beginning. They don't compete, and that's true now largely in most of the modern presidential elections. Even if a local candidate might have a chance of winning the state on a different party line, the presidential candidate has basically no chance at all. So this distills that, and it captures it with this little track and little markers to represent, how many electoral votes they have to get you to that 270 from this baseline that's very, very close to begin with. Let's talk a little about components, I guess. The rules are mostly clear. There was at least one place where I felt like I wasn't sure I had the answer. It's mainly a timing issue. These little cards are well done. Nice thick stock on them. And, it's Z-Man. They tend to do pretty good components. The actual playing cards, a little stiffer than I like, a little hard to shuffle, especially when, I guess no matter what, when you get down to a 15-card deck, it's going to be tough to shuffle. Even like the Minion, I don't really like when you first start off and you only have like 10 cards. That 15-card deck, the mechanism for dealing out the cards, a lot of the game comes down to your strategy before the game starts in terms of building that initial deck. You can make some big mistakes there, especially on your first play. It's not that long a game, so it's not that big a deal, but it does feel kind of like maybe there should be a little bit more capability to swap cards in or to get additional strategies into play. It does definitely constrain you as to, you really have to go in with, I think, a good focus to play solidly as to what your plan for the whole campaign really is and how you're going to get to that 270. You have to know that ahead of time. You may not make it the way that you expected to. You may have, the cards come out a little wrong or whatever, but you have to have some idea of, what you're aiming for and what sort of distribution of cards is. Hey, how many of those undecided voter scoops do you want? Remember, the other player might have the same ones in his deck, and then you're both kind of sitting there with crappy cards. You probably need cards that allow you to discard cards in order to make full use of those, as one example. I mentioned in the wrap there's sort of a false choice in terms of, I don't think that McCain should probably go for economic, and I don't think that Obama should go for military because they'll be dominated by the other players' advantages. On the other hand, here's where a mixed stance kind of helps you. You can screw with the... I thought that a mixed stance doesn't make any sense at all because, hey, you know, you're only going to have half the power to go into the particular zone that you like. But to tell you the truth, the more I'm thinking about it, and I probably haven't played this way ever in my all of 2 playings, to tell you the truth, I think it actually is kind of potent because if I'm focusing on, say, you know, the economic as Obama, a couple of cards that can screw with and prevent McCain from winning a key state might give me a little bit extra time to go for it. So I don't think it's completely a loser's choice there to focus on a more mixed or more balanced stance than I did. Both my players went all out into one or the other, though. And after a few more plays, I might be able to get a better feel for that. Of course, it's taken me, you know, I don't remember when I got this. It wasn't when it came out, but it's taken me quite a few years to get a second play. And my wife and I played it. I don't think she much liked it. And going back to the components very briefly, these little guys who track on here, that's kind of, it's very easy for it to get hard to read, basically. It's a clever, cute idea, but I don't know how well it really works. The risks of going negative, how valuable is that? Do you want to plot that into your overall plan or not? You know, you're not going to have a lot of surprise after the first time or 2 through your deck, depending on how aware your opponent is. He's going to know your deck pretty soon. And that's one of the things that, you know, kind of feels a little weird to me. Also, all of the cards are historical. That's nice because, you know, it links them to the flavor and everything, but it means that your campaign is like only a third of all the historical actions that they kind of judged actually happened. So there's not really, you know, you're not playing with a full deck, as it were, for good or evil. I mean, certainly what's kind of brilliant about the game is this initial setup of your deck and then testing it out in a varying circumstance. One that, you know, by the fact that you could bring up different states, etc., even if you're sure you have the winner killer deck, you still aren't going to be playing the same game every time. And there's, I think, a lot of room for replayability, for testing out different ways of playing it, with not that much in the way of overall components, etc. So that's kind of cool. I like the game, but I guess the biggest hitch for me is one that probably doesn't matter too much to people who are into it just for gameplay, which is that it's never the case that you're just fighting over 4 states in the general election. In the general election, you're fighting over the set of swing states all at once. And if something bad happens, even if you had a large lead in one of the swing states, you could still lose that. You might never lose, you know, New York or Alabama, but you're you know, a Virginia, if something terrible happens in your campaign, that's going to affect all of the swing states at once. So there's this gamey kind of mechanism where only 4 are out of play. There's no easy way to change that without, you know, drastically changing the game. And you don't have a schedule the way that you would in a primary season, where it would kind of make sense for only a few states at a time to be in play, really. So that's the facet that kind of hurts me here. I'm really excited about this focus on swing states. In fact, the whole game's about the swing states. But that it doesn't, match the reality of what happens during a campaign in other ways leaves me feeling like, okay, I've got a neat little game that's got a political theme to it, and it tries to handle things in a way that it's actually addressing the topic, but it's got this huge hole, and how big is that hole, and what does it mean? And I guess that's kind of where it just all sort of falls apart to me. So it's not one that I try to push as, oh yeah, this is one of the better, election ones, even though it does get one component at least more right than any other general election game that I've seen. Even Mr. President, which I really like, doesn't. You're both at kind of this pretty much, you could get any state you want. It doesn't matter that you're the Democrats in the late 60s, and the South should be completely solid, and the Republicans should have very little chance of making inroads there. And that, certain other states are just as solidly Republican. It would take a blowout of massive proportions to swing the states that are aligned towards someone. And these other games just don't do it that way. As a strategist, you can pretty much get whatever state you want. Well, in this, certain states are just out of play. If you did well enough, maybe this wouldn't, be a close election at all. But unless you're getting all the swing states, you're not really going to be getting any of those states that are pretty well aligned. It's just the nature of the modern political world, and that's something that it's very. It was very neat to see that handled as the focus of the design, but it wasn't enough to keep the game, trying to think of the right word, to keep the game focused well. I didn't want to use focus again, that was the main problem. Focused well enough on the overall issues revolving around the election. In addition to that, things like the timing and whether or not states stop being in play just because somebody got a large lead in them. That's just not the way it seems to work. I'm having a hard time putting this away. I got it all in the box before. There must be a way. Anyway, I think it's mostly interesting as a game and as a simulation. It, like every other presidential election game that I know of, falls, either primary or general election, falls far short of what you'd really want taken care of. And even the beast of them all, Road to the White House, if you go look at my review of that, it catches all these little subsystems and tries to have them work. But the problem is it doesn't really take into account so much that has such large effects that you really don't feel like you're doing a real election. You feel like you still feel like you're playing a game rather than something that has any real strong simulation value. And there's nothing wrong with playing a game. It's just when they put that much effort into it, you expect more. With this, I had hopes because of that focus on swing states. Honestly, I think 1960 does a better job than this does, and it's probably probably the strongest of them. Even Mr. President may do a better job, because the swing state issue isn't enough to account for all of it. It's the fact that everything really is being decided at once. Something that focused on swing states and allowed you to go across the board in them, though, and allowed events to affect them, and maybe even drag other states into play or not, based on some really crazy stuff, perhaps, could have been an interesting choice. This, however, it gives you a nice framework, for a competitive game, and one where you have some replayability, maybe not a huge amount, but some, and a lot of different choices, especially in terms of how you're going to build that initial deck. Now, of course, here's the thing. You build your initial deck, and your opponent, just like in Magic or in any game where you get to kind of design the deck, your opponent's design is up against yours. So it's not like you can come up with the ultimate winning deck. It's that you kind of outguess your opponent. So there's a certain element of just pure guesswork, and which will determine how the game's going to actually play out, whether or not you're going to be competing in the same states, or whether some of them are just going to fall to one player or the other. In the game that I played, well, I think the same way. So, my little individual group think, let's go for the biggest states, for the undecided voters. Let's use cards that allow us, let's focus on one category, either the military or the economic side, whichever one we're stronger in, and let's go all in on that, and let's see what happens. And, so I had two decks that were essentially the same facing each other. I don't know what happens if you start playing around with that more. I made the decision in both cases not to go for a dirtier attack-based campaign. Just because I didn't want to take the risks. I have a low tolerance for risk and such things. All right, that's about it. We'll send this up, and there's, like I said, there's a lot of room to explore in this game, and certainly worth picking it up for the number of plays that you could get out of it.